and wanted to continue these conversations and just kind of give you an update, and then we'll get into the conversation of the day. A couple things going on. We passed the omnibus, the spending bill, down in Washington, D.C. out of the House. All indications are the Senate's moving forward with it, and that will hopefully be taken care of either today or at the latest Monday. And all indications are is that we're going to get that into a law so that we don't have to have the government shutdown conversation, and we can move into, over the next 9 months, a continuation of the open and transparent regular order to deal with the spending for the federal government. And just so we're all clear, and there's been obviously some phone calls that have come in, some emails that have come in, some press coverage on this, and there's been objections from the conservative side of America, from the liberal side of America, and just so we're all clear what we're talking about as we deal with this spending bill. As you know, many of the people here have been to our town hall meetings, and when we're talking about the omnibus, promnibus, that type of thing, we are talking about the discretionary spending, essentially, of the federal government. We spend about $3.4 trillion, $3.5 trillion. The numbers for fiscal year 14 will come out in February, so we'll update this chart at that point in time. So these are the best numbers we have. But for relative purposes, the spending that we were talking about this week is pretty much these two pieces of the pie, okay? Everything else is either mandatory spending, entitlement spending. It is outside the domain of the $1 trillion omnibus bill that was passed last week, or this past couple of days. A couple reasons. Now, I did vote in support of it, just so everyone's aware of that, if you're not aware of that. I believe it's a step in the right direction. We have brought spending down in these areas from when we started. Good morning. Thank you for coming. We're at a 10-13 level. That's a $1 trillion, $13 billion level for those areas here. That is a significant reduction. It's about a $165 billion reduction from when we went in 2010. So we are downsizing the federal government, and as many of you know, that is one thing I believe in. We have to get this national debt crisis under control at $18 trillion, and we are going to take each opportunity to move the ball down the field. Looking at this bill, there are some things in there that I was supportive of, that got my interest. Things like protecting the Second Amendment rights. There were some provisions in there that dealt with the UN Small Arms Treaty restrictions on the Senate. That's kind of going down that path. There are some issues with the EPA. There are some issues with the IRS where we are putting more accountability into those agencies as a result of this bill and their spending requirements. And so there were some successes, is maybe what you've heard from our position out there publicly. By no means was there overwhelming, perfect drafting of this bill. There were people on both sides that were upset. A lot of folks on the liberal side of the spectrum were concerned about the swaps and the campaign donation reforms. And just so we're clear, those swaps dealt with our agricultural community in particular. And a lot of our farmers rely on those market makers that are related to those regulations that dealt with those Dodd-Frank reforms that a lot of people are classifying as a big bank bailout. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that public determination, but I understand the concern. The other issue was the campaign donation. Just so we're clear on that, what we were talking about there was the donation for the conventions for the national parties, Democrat and Republican conventions, because we have attacked the spending for those conventions from the taxpayers funding those programs. I've always been a believer that the party should be responsible for those costs. And so what this campaign finance reform was about was just to make sure that the taxpayer doesn't pay for it, rather the donors pay for those events or the parties. And I understand the concern. I understand that people are concerned that they can be manipulated and things like that. And that's why we're not supportive. And there may be some work that has to be done on that to get that restricted further as we go forward. A big piece of legislation that we're very proud of that made its way into the final omnibus and likely it's going to get signed into law is our Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Act. The Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Act is something we've been working on in our office for the last year and a half, partnered up with Joe Kennedy up in Massachusetts, Sherrod Brown, and Roy Blunt, our Senate partners in regards to that legislation. And so we did that about a year and a half ago, and there was an opportunity to get this taken care of last week, and we're glad to say it's not likely on its way to being signed into law. That Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Act, I can't tell you how important that is from my perspective for U.S. manufacturing. These are the public-private partnerships that can now be set legislatively across the country, competitively apply for, and get one of these hubs where we're making the new products, the new innovative services, the new innovative manufacturing industries, so that we have a new industry where we make it here, to sell it there, and we create the jobs of today and tomorrow. And we got in it early on that, and so we're very proud that that is going to be enacted. And to thread the needle, find it through this Congress was something that I give credit to the staff and everyone working as a team amongst all of us in the Senate and the House with our Democratic partners, as well as our Republican partners, to get that done. And so it shows you it can get done, just a matter of doing it, blocking and tackling day in and day out. So without that, any further ado, I mean, I do these to listen, to get input. And so let's have the conversation, and we'll go from there.
So we got questions covering a variety of topics. We'll try and touch them as many as we can. A lot of them environmental issues, so we'll definitely get to those too. We do have a group of questions that came in. As you mentioned, there was some campaign finance changes in the crowd of us, concerns about money in politics from Mike, Carl, Amanda. What are your plans, party's plans for passing legislation to reverse the trend of spending less and less time doing the people's work and more time fundraising? Number one issue for Congress people is fundraising. That's what they spend their time working on. What are you doing to get poisonous money out of politics? The court has legalized bribery and extortion. How can people who aren't billionaires be heard and have their issues addressed? 65 to 70% of people across the country are voting for referendums calling for an amendment to the Constitution to make it clear corporations shall not enjoy the same human rights as actual people, and that money is not speech. They do this regardless of political affiliation, an issue to get united behind. So issues regarding the Citizens United decision and all the time that gets spent raising money for political campaigns.
Well, we've always been supportive, and I definitely appreciate the concern that is raised here. And we've always been supportive of the more transparency, the more sunlight in this arena, the better off we are. So people can see where the money's coming from, where the donations are coming from. And I will tell you, I don't keep track of this stuff in regards to our campaign, in regards to who gives, who doesn't give. What we do is we look at an issue, come to a position, and a lot of times, people that are in agreement with us on those issues will support us. And that's why I believe the transparency is our best tool here to hold people accountable for the people that are potentially abusing this, who are selling their vote, so to speak. I'm not naive enough to think that those types of abuses haven't occurred, nor will occur in the future. Now to say, on the federal level, just so we're all clear, corporate money is not allowed. It's individual donations at the federal level. So that's a good thing from the concern raised by folks on the corporate question. But you get into the issue of freedom of speech, freedom of people doing what they want with the money, and it's on both sides. I mean, it is amazing how much money goes into these campaigns. I mean, we just got off of a campaign here in Western New York. It was $5 million by the time it was all done. That's a lot of money, and there's no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, I think transparency, accountability, members who can't stand in front of groups, who don't go and do town halls, who don't sit in front of people and say, this is what I believe, this is what my position is, and really be able to be accountable to the electorate by standing in front of them in public. Those are the ones I think you got to keep an eye on, and you got to keep an eye on everyone, but those in particular who kind of hide behind these things. So I appreciate that concern, and let's see what we can do to push that. Yeah, what's the concern?
Follow up on that.
Yeah,
so what about transparency legislation? The TrackGov website gave you a 0 rating for 2013 on support for government transparency legislation. So that's where things can start to happen. There are a number of different bills that have been proposed to improve the situation as far as transparency and to allow the voter to see that big money isn't controlling our voters, and you got a 0 rating on that. So.
Well, I'm not familiar with the organization. There's organizations across America that, and then, so what's the name of the organization?
Trackgov.us. Either that or it's
Track.gov.
Track. I think it's track.gov.us.
And what was their 0 rating? They have a rating?
They have a list from 2013 of transparency bills, and you were given a 0 for support on those. It might have had to do with co-sponsorship, sponsorship or co-sponsorship of any of the whole list of about a dozen government transparency
Do you know how they determine
pieces of
which,
legislation.
do you know how they determine which bills were transparency bills and which ones weren't?
You'd have to
You
look
know, that
into
is something that because it's important to me, because some of these organizations are completely legitimate, completely doing good work and out there working real hard. Some of them are not. Some of them are fronts for other agendas, other issues, and so they go through and they'll cherry pick different legislations, different bills, and you know there's thousands of bills out there, there's thousands of different pieces of legislation, and they'll go through and they'll cherry pick to get a rating so that you can get the easy headline out there of saying, this organization says Tom Reed or Jane Doe is terrible.
No, the
So I
track
appreciate that.
only, it's not, it has for you, for example, for every member, it has ratings in a whole slew of different areas. And it's really nonpartisan. They weren't, painting you or anybody else in a totally negative way. It's based on votes, based on sponsorship of bills, et cetera, and they give different, different ratings based on those. And that was one that particularly concerned me, because I think that is an issue that is across the board. It's not just a liberal issue. I mean, one of the things that people are really frustrated about with Congress these days is the influence of big money. Absolutely.
And that's where they're tripping.
And,
So I appreciate
legislation
that.
is where something could happen.
And that's where having this dialogue. So what I promise you is we will go back, look at this rating from the track.gov.us, and let's see what bills are referring to. And then we'll pull the bills and we'll read them. That's very important to do. And we'll make a determination whether or not it's consistent with our position, which is we do support transparency here. So if there are some legislative models out there that can accomplish that and are truly productive in doing that, we'll get behind it and become supportive. Yeah.
Yeah, Carl Fitzke, I asked the question about the 65 to 70% of people supporting the constitutional amendment. I asked the question about, I brought up that 65 to 70% of people have been supporting these resolutions across the country in various towns, supporting amendment to the Constitution. Taking away, I don't want to get into it here too deep, but right now legally corporations are enjoying the exact same human rights that actual citizenry do, and that's a concern for me. I think it's fundamentally at the base of every issue, not just elections, but it influences lobbying in our government, and it's about who controls the conversation. It influences the media that we have offered up to us, and who controls that, and who even controls the conversation, much less, what decisions are made. So I'm very interested in knowing if you've been able to study that issue or not yet, and if not, I want to encourage you to take a look at that, because there are certain privileges I think we can give corporations for very good reason. There is a place, most reasonable people believe there's a place in society for public, i.e. government, and private, i.e. corporate, influence and work. But it's just too one-sided right now, where the government's pretty much owned by the corporations. And let me just finish up and say, I appreciate the transparency. That's a really important issue. Create that, but it really does no good for me to know that George Soros and the Koch brothers are controlling everything. That doesn't solve our nation's problems at the end of the day. We all have rights as individuals. I'm not concerned about taking away the rights of the union or General Electric or something to each individual, in those organizations has a right to address their representatives like we're doing today. Thank you very much for being here. So that argument doesn't hold a lot of water with me when you say it.
Well, see, and Carl, that's why you clearly have studied the issue, and we've looked at the issue, clearly not as closely as you have. Spent a lot of time there. So let's continue that conversation.
Thank you.
So, because when we get into this area, everybody who is supportive of it will often, not everybody, but people that are supportive of it will be like, okay, it's the big corporations. Then you get into union corporations. And they're like, well, no, that's okay.
No, that's not where I stand.
And that's where,
yeah.
so we're all on the same page,
Yeah.
where when we talk about this issue, if we're going to go down this path, we need to make sure that everybody is treated the same.
Right.
And so where would you draw the line? Because you referenced something that is also important, is recognizing that we in America have a free market system. We have corporations, we have limited liability companies, we have all these business structures, union organizations, unincorporated associations, all those things that can be utilized out there. And you recognize that there's some role for those groups in America's society. So how would you define what is good corporate privileges versus abusive corporate structures?
Well, I'd start in the 14th Amendment and read that carefully and see where it refers to natural persons and then where they left the word natural out. And the argument is that, oh, well, that was so artificial persons can have the same rights. And many of us believe that's a lot of baloney. And it was there, that amendment is there to free people who weren't free and still struggle today to get, equal access to things. And so that's where I start with all of this, and looking at the great majority of court cases that brought the 14th Amendment into play. It's all corporations saying you're violating my human rights to make a living. Like I live in a town, and some corporation from 1,000 miles is going to come and tell me I've got to do something in my town because we're violating their human rights. Like I draw the line in situations like that. And
so what rights do you respect?
I would say, what's that?
What rights of those organizations? Do you respect?
Like the right to go to court and address, an issue, or sue or be sued, for example. A corporation or a group should enjoy that right.
So you respect the corporate bail, the corporate liability for jail.
Yeah,
that's all about.
As I understand it right now, yeah. And but when I see, I got a cousin-in-law up in Canada. He's a lobbyist in Washington. I mean, the guy doesn't even live in the United States, and he's down here influencing my government. I love the guy, but that's his job. But again, somebody like him or Soros or the Koch brothers, with their influence, they're not going to be thrilled about an idea like this. But I mean, this is the kind of stuff that inspired the original Boston Tea Party, right? People were like, you can't tell me as the East India Company, a trading company, whether I can buy or sell tea from who. And the reason that we were being told in this country, I wasn't alive yet, but was because the British Parliament and the King were all in cahoots with that East India Trading Company. I mean, they controlled the situation, and that's a really great example to get people united behind. That's why people jumped on those ships and threw millions of dollars worth of tea in today's dollars into the pond.
I think the bigger issue, you're touching on it, is the concentration of power. And that's where the tool that I find most effective to combat that is sunlight, is transparency.
That's an important part.
And individual engagement. That's why participating, showing up, that's so important. I mean, and you look at the voting rolls, you look at who turns out to vote. I mean, look at the percentages. We can do better than that. We need to do better than that. When you get percentages of 40% of people voting and 50% voting is a great voter turnout. No,
or
we
that
need more than that. And so we got to execute we got to look ourselves in the mirror, some of this, and say, we can do better as individuals too, not discounting.
I don't want to take up too much time, but yeah, in this age where 52% is considered a mandate, I'm excited about 65 or 70, so I appreciate your opening up the conversation. And let's move forward on, trying to solve this, because I do want to get rid of these corporate, the corporate personhood in the sense that they enjoy all the rights, but you're right, the crux is in in order to sort of flip the switch on that, you do, I think, politically have to have the other part of the equation written up too, so that we can do that all together. Like, what rights or privileges would you give corporations? And that's something many of us haven't worked on too hard yet, so maybe we can work on that together.
And that's where we can work together, because there's some agreement. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to, just to follow up on transparency.
Yeah.
When I drove down here this morning, I went through the Commons, and like everyone, I saw Simeon's, a building that was leveled by a truck that was a runaway truck. And you talk about transparency. know you didn't read it because you can read 1,000 pages. And both Susan Collins, attached to that bill, rolls back truck regulations that were supposed to go into effect that is of such personal concern for those of us who live in Ithaca. And quite frankly, I don't even know if you knew about it. A young mother was killed, she was pregnant. It was devastating. And when you talk about transparency, and I appreciate the history like this, these are things that affect us personally. And I know President Obama supported the bill, some employers supported the bill, but attached to it were abominations that affect people's lives. The fact that we now will have truck drivers driving who don't have adequate rest will cost people's lives. And that's completely unacceptable. And I want you to explain to the people of Ithaca, and I want you to go back, and I don't know if you to tell President Obama, to tell Sonny Boyer, to tell Congressman Boehner, to tell Chuck Schumer and Karen Gillibrand, who probably will vote for this bill, that this is a disgrace, an abomination, and not fair in memory of that woman who was killed by a runaway truck, and we will not forget this.
I appreciate that. So on the issue, because I'm very aware of that tragic situation that occurred.
The bill
Yeah.
rolls back regulation.
But I don't know, and this is where the debate comes in, is how much regulation is reasonable regulation, how much is unreasonable regulation. And Susan Collins obviously felt that this was an excessive
They
regulation.
truck drivers
And
can
they were
drive
able to get
82 hours a week.
And you voted for it.
And you voted for it.
We voted for that.
And I hope you explain that to
And as you talk to the trucking industry, as you talk to truckers, independent haulers, who we have hundreds of them throughout the district.
trucking
that does.
industry wrote this legislation for you guys.
No. Well, just so, I mean, I did not work with Susan Collins to draft the legislation.
No.
You know, it was in the bill, we were aware it was in the bill, and there have been some concerns raised that there's excessive regulation coming down on the trucking industry, the black box issue, the excessive requirements for rest periods, how they define rest. Do they qualify the time that people or truckers are waiting and sleeping as they're on the clock, but because of delays in delivering their products to their terminals, you know, they're catching up their rest. How do you account for the time that they're sleeping 2 hours while they wait to deliver their goods at their, you know, and all that stuff is part of this conversation.
Absolutely,
And
and I appreciate
yeah.
it, Congressman. I want to also thank you for your speeches on the no excuses movement, which I think is wonderful. But this again is corporations doing things, and I know you come to the district a lot, and I appreciate it, and we feel that we have no voice when we see something like that.
No, and I appreciate the frustration. I'm trying to provide the other side of the conversation. And it's not that I'm leaning one way or the other. It's that there are real, like we have an independent trucker who lives over in Rushville, small town, and I mean he comes and he's like, Tom, I'm barely making it.
Yeah.
And all of these regulations, and I'm putting my life, I don't want to put my life at risk. I'm getting my rest, I'm doing everything right, and I'm trying to follow all the rules.